relative not only to what we are concerned about, the opioid epidemic, but also how some legislation and potential constitutional amendments can affect that as we proceed through the state of Michigan from this point forward. So just to give you an idea of what this is all about tonight, I, along with Ruth, will be looking for comments and suggestions from all of you, your comments and your opinions. This is a proposal that we are discussing, particularly Proposal 18.1, the legalization of marijuana, and it will be decided by the voters in the November general election. Polls are here and polls are there, but the final decision rests upon all 83 counties to make the decision as to whether or not the legislation will pass. If it does pass, there are going to be some sweeping changes that are going to occur afterward. So what we wanted to provide to you is tonight there was a fan forum, Families Against Narcotics Forum, in Metro Detroit area, where individuals were interviewed on the pro side and on the con side of the issue. We are going to play portions of it, and we're going to talk about it a little bit, and we're going to be looking for, again, any comments or anything you want to bring up during the course of it, please don't hesitate to do so. And after that, we are going to give you the official position of FAN relative to this proposal, as well as, after that, at least if you could share the information with your friends and your family. It's your decision. It rests upon the population, the people of the state of Michigan, all voter eligible individuals who are going to decide whether this passes or not. So without further ado, we'll get right into it. And what we're going to do is begin, if we could, Ruth, with the video. And Ruth has it all keyed up. This is the pro side. Each individual has 8 minutes on the pro side, 3 minutes each individual for 8 minutes each, I should say, on the con side. We're going to play the pro side first. And it'll come up in just a moment. Ruth is tech savvy. She says she isn't, but she is.
Give me just a minute.
No, she's fine. While that's loading, does anyone have any comments or questions or anything at this point before we start? The silence is deafening. I said hello to other individuals as well. Chief, Mrs. Jensen as well, thank you for being here as well, greatly appreciated. Mrs. Jensen is going to be our speaker next month regarding issues pertaining to how courts are handling bond issues, drug-related issues, and what is available to individuals who are facing significant issues relative to, well, how do we proceed in the court process? What's available to me for recovery?
About what we do and who we are. So Families Against Narcotics is a nonprofit organization that provides...
Was there a time?
Yes, I'm going to...
So because it is an hour-and-a-half long discussion, we are going to bookend it a little bit, just cutting through some of those introductions.
Try right about, my note has not, wait, no, it is here.
I'm going to start it here.
Start at 12:46.
12:46.
That'll work too.
This
is Judge Mack. Judge Mack is the state court administrator for the state of Michigan. It's one of my bosses.
First one, the speakers, and we'll do introduction. So we'll start with Robin Stein.
The sound is not the greatest at times.
First of all, thank you all so much for coming tonight, and thank you to Families Against Narcotics for inviting the community to come and discuss our initiative. Okay, we can go ahead and go to the second slide. Great. So, it is our belief that prohibition hasn't worked. Prohibition, just like with alcohol prohibition, the prohibition of marijuana has actually increased crime. It's enriched criminal organizations, such as illicit gangs that use the sale of marijuana to make money. It's led to unsafe, untested products, very potent untested products, and put those products right on the market into the hands of our youth. It's completely failed to stop consumption. It has we have not eradicated marijuana in this state or in this country with the laws of prohibition. So it is our position that prohibition is not a good policy, that it is not working to protect our youth or our communities. More than 200,000 patients in Michigan currently are registered and use medical marijuana. Conditions such as PTSD, cancer, glaucoma, HIV. So we have a large population using medical marijuana for medical purposes right now. I played a role there working on with the legislature to put rules and regulations in place. The initiative that passed in 2018 didn't really have any testing, it didn't have any tested packaging, it didn't have any dosing requirements. And so it was very difficult for the patients to know what kind of product they were getting. And it was also difficult, I think, for law enforcement because there was no labels on the packaging, there was no dates on the packaging. So if they pulled someone over, it was really hard to determine whether or not they were allowed to have that product, where it come from. So we put rules in place recently to ensure that the product is safer and packaged and child resistant. Patients are still being arrested right now. That's something that we hope to change with this initiative, but I don't know if any of you saw in the news, Sweet Dolores up in Clare County. She's 85 years old, 8 years old, and she had a medical marijuana card that had just expired. When the officer came to her door and said that he smelled marijuana, she told him yes, she was prescribed it. She has numerous medical conditions. Her card had just expired. They arrested her, took her to jail overnight. We'd like to avoid that in the future. We don't think she should have spent a single night in jail, especially at her age. It's safe. Cannabis is safer than alcohol or tobacco. According to the CDC, about 30,000 U.S. deaths are attributed to the health effects of alcohol per year. A January 2015 study in Scientific Reports, marijuana's mortality is approximately 114 times less than alcohol. The National Institute on Drug Abuse study addiction rates: marijuana 9%, alcohol 15%, heroin is 17%. Cocaine is 17%, and heroin is 23%. Prohibition skews Michigan law enforcement's priorities. We're wasting millions of dollars. Over 20,000 marijuana arrests a year versus 12,000 arrests for violent crime. We think that time could be better used, focused on enforcing violent crime laws. We would like law enforcement to focus on the opiate epidemic. The rate of opiate-related overdose, as I'm sure you're well aware, is skyrocketing. A lot of us have been affected. Families have been affected. My family's been affected. There's a social justice need for reform. Young African American men are 3.2 times more likely to be arrested than white men, even though the consumption rate between the two is the same. Public perceptions are advancing. The majority of Michiganders don't think that marijuana should be prohibited, and they think that people should go to jail for responsible adult use. Support is growing across the nation. As you can see, many states have decided to allow medical or adult use cannabis across the country. Tax revenue. Colorado has generated $500 million in new tax revenue to roads, schools, local governments, and PTSD research, which Dr. Sewell talks about that. Nevada collected nearly $70 million in its first year of legalization for tax revenue. The proposal has provisions for personal freedom, business licensing, strong regulation, and taxation. Somebody who wanted to use marijuana in their home could do so. They could not go out and sell marijuana to a minor child. That's illegal. Or to anyone else. No one can just go sell marijuana to another adult or child and really mention them. There's no smoking allowed in public. With business licenses, you would have to go through a very robust licensing process that is very difficult to get, so that would help ensure that the kind of people operating these facilities are responsible and regulated. Legalization and licensing. Adults 21 and older may use, possess, cultivate unlimited amounts of cannabis. 6 types of businesses: cultivators, processors, testing facilities, secure transporters, retail stores, micro businesses. We modeled this program after what the state legislature passed for medical. We wanted it to be an easy transition from medical to adult use cannabis, and regulated by the State Department that is now currently regulating medical marijuana. The initiative legalizes industrial hemp for farmers to grow, requires testing and labeling for consumer protection. I talked about some of the child-proof packaging. And
Do you want to take some time for Sue or
I would love for Sue to just pick that up.
Thank you so much. Let's see if we can switch the slides. Oh yeah, no problem. And while she's getting them, so I'm just gonna do a quick intro. So as you mentioned, I'm a primary care physician from Scottsdale, Arizona.
She's originally from Farmington, Michigan.
You know, I see patients primarily, and also do cannabis research. And one of the things, besides the study that she referenced, the one we're doing an FDA controlled trial looking at different varieties of cannabis in military veterans with PTSD. It took us 7 years to get that study underway. To help it overcome all the regulatory hurdles and get approved. We purchase our cannabis from the federal government and administer it to. So I'm observing patients every day in my laboratory who are using cannabis. I'm seeing sort of the good and the bad of cannabis on a daily basis, and I understand the concern. This is not a plant that is free from side effects. I just want to make that really clear. I don't consider myself pro-cannabis. I'm just pro-science. And it took me many years to come to view cannabis as a medicine. I was very skeptical and anti-cannabis when I went on a lifelong Republican. I'd never used cannabis my whole life, and I was really dismissive of a lot of my patient claims that they were getting benefit from this. But slowly, as I started to examine the scientific literature and listen to the stories from these patients, I became quite, persuaded that at least this deserved to be that safe legal access to lab-tested cannabis should be, a basic right, and that that ending prohibition would create an environment that would be more permissive to do the clinical trials that we all so desperately want. In our studies, we look at both safety and efficacy in the same study. So we're trying to examine both. The problem with most of the research that's been done to date is it's primarily all safety studies looking at harmful side effects and addiction potential. We've been allowed to do very little in the way of evaluating efficacy. So if you go to the next 2 slides, maybe, you'll see in 1936, so you notice that logo there. I'm a representative of Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. We started this charity. It's a 501c3 that we launched about 3 years ago to try to create a safe harbor for physicians to talk openly about their views on ending cannabis prohibition, because we felt we were looking at data. There were a lot of online surveys showing that physicians actually, over 60% of physicians in the U.S. believe that cannabis should be fully legalized, not just decriminalized, but legalized for adult use. And so we started to examine this further and got a huge groundswell of physicians coming together under this charity. And so we started to put together some talking points about this. So I wanted to share this with you briefly. I know we're short on time, but the point is that when prohibition of cannabis started in 1937, it occurred over the objections of the AMA, right? The AMA tried to persuade the government that this was a bad idea, that prohibition is a flawed public policy. If you see in the next couple slides, you'll see Dr. Woodward in the next one. It talks about he was a physician who was also the legal counsel for the AMA at that time, and he vigorously objected. You can look at his testimony. I have a reference there where you can read some of his comments. I'm sorry, on the next slide, you'll see the reference to the hearing testimony, and it's pretty compelling to see his arguments. But in the next slide, we talk about 80 years later, the problems with prohibition, the harms that have come from criminalizing this plant. And Robin has raised some of the really important ones. I want to point out one that she didn't reference, which is the fact that synthetic cannabinoids, the synthetic substitutes like K2 and spice that we hear about. I take care of these patients who come into the ER, and it's so depressing to see these. This is an outgrowth of prohibition. These toxic chemicals come from making cannabis illegal, because then people create these toxic substitutes that get around the drug testing, and this are extremely dangerous. This is not cannabis. These are chemically derived toxic substances that are extremely dangerous and an outgrowth of prohibition. So let's go to the next one, and you'll see why physicians support legalization of what we so-called street drug. Because we know that cannabis is still relatively benign. I know that that's concerning to say in a group like this, and I agree. I really support the mission of this group. I really applaud you guys for what you're doing. But I feel strongly that cannabis, as someone who observes cannabis being used every day in our lab, that I feel it's far less toxic than most of the prescriptions that I write for patients every day. That it is very well tolerated for the most part by patients, and I feel like that the idea, I wanted to jump to the idea that the racial injustice of prohibition has been on display for us now. That prohibition has been unfairly or disproportionately attacking our communities of color. On the next slide, you'll see this is a kind of where we stratify the addictive nature of different drugs. Talk about, you can see there that marijuana is sort of on the same level as caffeine. So a lot of people, maybe flippantly, you'll hear folks in the movement say, oh, you know, cannabis is no more addictive than a cup of coffee. But if you look at the addiction rates of caffeine and cannabis, they are truly similar. It's like 8 to 10% addiction rates in most of the literature, which is a serious problem. I'm not discounting. There is a real issue of cannabis dependence, but it's still far less than all the other much more serious toxic drugs that we have out there. So on the next slide, you'll see we talk about underage use and our concerns about young brains being exposed to cannabis. Of course, we all want to prevent young people from using. We want to prevent pediatric, unintended pediatric exposures. All those things are a huge issue for us. In the next slide, you'll see the notion of marijuana as a gateway. I would say I've always been worried about this, but in our study of peer-reviewed scientific literature, what we're seeing is that cannabis is actually more of an exit drug than a gateway to harder drugs. The reason it has traditionally been viewed as a gateway is because we force patients who need safe access to go talk to illegal drug dealers, where then they're exposed to much harder drugs in the black market. But if we could enable a regulated market here in Michigan, which by the way is my home state, I grew up here in Farmington Hills, I care about this community, and I want to see you guys create a regulated market for lab-tested cannabis. And I think that the idea, I would like to show you some of our literature that we're producing with the University of Michigan. We're conducting rigorous surveys where we are examining cannabis as a substitution for opioids and other addictive drugs. And I would really would love to be able to share that with you if you're willing. Thank you.
Thank you, I'm Ron. I am the SFL TAP advisor for the state of Michigan. What that means is that we have 45 to 50,000 soldiers that come back through the state every year. We have 45 to 50,000 veterans here in Michigan, and I see anywhere from 7,500 to 10,000 of those veterans each and every year. I am the only TAA in the state, and it's very, very tough to reach all the veterans. We do the best job we can with what we have to work with. I am not here as an educated member of this board. These people are much more educated than I am. I gave 27 years of service, and I come back and I look at the experiences that we have. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was when I came back for my last appointment, the Xanax was given to me by the VA doctors for depression, adjustment disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, and then Vicodin for an issue where I broke my neck back in 2012. Yeah, sorry. I apologize for that. And as I got into the TAA position, working with veterans in the state, I noticed that the amount of drugs and narcotics, and I think all of us here are against narcotics. And I think nobody's pro-narcotics, especially illegal narcotics. I've always thought it was very intellectually dishonest to call marijuana a Class 1 narcotic, but it is by law. It is a Class 1 narcotic. But in my experience, all I can tell you is I've watched the soldiers that have come back and have been drugged and drugged and drugged from Ann Arbor VA, Saginaw VA, Detroit VA, Battle Creek Veterans Homes. And I've seen, I only have this experience. I've lost 16 of my soldiers, not to combat. I've lost 16 of my soldiers to suicide since December 12th of 2011. And several of those, and I can give you their names, Tony, John, Adam, John, Greg, and Brandon. Those are 6 that all died because of opioids. And I've seen other soldiers as they come back, and I've seen them self-medicate, or I've seen them get their card, and I've seen them lead very, very productive lives smoking pot. It's just kind of what it is. It's just, they take a couple of days before they go to sleep at night, and they get the first good night's sleep that they've had in years. That's my experience with it, is to watch these soldiers thrive, and I've seen guys that have had some very, very serious issues and come back, and it is in my very humble opinion that THC has helped many, many of these veterans, and I've seen so many of them leave the opioid world using THC, CBD oils. And I hurt for these guys. I see them every day. You can walk into the EPA clinic and you can just see the ghost in the shelves and then where they're for. And it's just in my personal experience that I have seen soldiers come back to life through what we call a Class 1 narcotic, and that's THC. So I wish I had more educated literature, and I wish I had more, I wish I had something that, I don't know what I'm trying to say. All I'm trying to say is that in my opinion, in my limited opinion of the thousands of veterans that I've served with, I've never seen a soldier taking THC or CBD oils that has had issues. Not one, but that's just in my experience. And that's right here in the state of Michigan. So I thank you. I'll see you the rest of my time. That's all I have to say.
We have a couple minutes left over, so I just want to announce that.
We have
There's an individual that's going to speak now who apparently is a doctor at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor.
We have 2 minutes. Could you be able to?
Yes, 2 minutes? Okay, that's 2 minutes. Sure, so thank you very much. Thanks, Sue, and thanks everybody. My name is Dr. Lukinas. I work in Ann Arbor, and I see patients and we help them through cannabis. I also do research with the University of Michigan. There are a few things that I would like to say. First of all, thanks for everybody for being here. But as far as cannabis is concerned, one thing, first, if you look at the science so far, cannabis is extremely, extremely safe. Much safer than coffee and opioids and all those things, you know. So it's first very safe. Second, through every day we see patients, they really can be a very, very effective medication and a very effective tool for patients to become better, you know, to feel better, have quality of life is very important. In my research that we do at the university, our study got published in the Journal of Pain, and what we found, as our patients use cannabis, up to 64% decrease in opioid use and opioid side effects. These are facts, you know. The other thing is that to educate ourselves. The one thing that I found very effective for me is the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. This is a national academy, it's very prestigious, and they did a report that went throughout the world, they looked at only the highest quality study designs, doing the highest quality research, and they did a report. And if you Google this, National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, cannabis report, you can read the whole thing for free on the internet. And the things that they found, basically, is that cannabis is very, very effective for chronic pain, is scientifically proven that it works for patients with chemotherapy, nausea, and vomiting, and for MS, people with MS that have muscle spasticity. These are now, again, scientifically proven. The other thing is we need a lot of research, and thanks for suing everybody else for trying to do that. So the one, for me, as an individual, the one thing that I see every day is for our patients and how effective it is. The second thing for me as well, besides the medicinal aspect of cannabis, in this specific issue, is sovereignty over my own body. If I choose to put something inside my body and change my reality, either alcohol or caffeine or sugar or cannabis, and I'm not hurting anybody, I should be able to do that. And people in our state should be able to do that. If you, and again, like Sue and everybody else was saying, there is an issue with cannabis, you know, there's not like anything else. You shouldn't smoke and drive, for example. But if you do that and you hurt somebody, there are laws already for that, for driving and hurting somebody. But if I choose in my own privacy of my own home to use cannabis without hurting anybody, not only hurting anybody, but being able to help myself and my pain and my back, and all of a sudden have high quality of life, I think that's an important kind of issue. As far as the medical aspect of it, again, very, very effective, very, very safe. It's not without any issues, most definitely, not for everybody, but if you educate yourself and use it and utilize it in a way that is very slow, methodical, and effective, it can be a very, very substance, very, very safe substance, and it's very, very effective for a lot of issues.
And how many patients can't get into the medical program, and how adult use would enable access?
Yeah, thank you. So right now, around 200,000 patients, I see around 2,000 patients in our clinic per year or so. And this is the one thing that if you ask certain people, it's a good question, it's difficult to answer. So there are different conditions, but I see a lot of patients that I ask them, you know, why are you using cannabis? And a lot of times they're using cannabis, not necessarily for the condition like just chronic pain. Some patients have anxiety, some patients have depression, or other ways that they use it that are very, very effective for them and the quality of life that they can have in their community and for themselves. So a lot of these people that don't have those specific conditions are able to use it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So that is, at this point, the pro aspect of the legalization of marijuana. In a few moments, you're going to hear the con side of it. What we've done is the next slide is real, I believe, is what the actual proposal reads. Simply, the proposal would allow individuals 21 and older to purchase, possess, and use marijuana and marijuana-infused edibles and grow up to 12 marijuana plants for personal consumption. Impose a 10-ounce limit for marijuana kept at residences and require amounts over 2.5 ounces, 25 ounces, I'm sorry, to be secured. Is that 2.5? It is 2.5, to be secured in locked containers. create a state licensing system for marijuana businesses and allow municipalities to add or restrict, subject to a 10% tax dedicated to implementation costs, clinical trials, schools, roads, municipalities, essentially where the money is going, and change several current violations for crimes to civil infractions. That's what the proposal is going to read on your ballot in November. Ruth, if you go to the next slide, please. And so what I think is next is kind of a summary of what the pros were. And I know it was a little difficult to understand. It was difficult for me to understand as well. That is the hearing of it. The audio is not very good, but fortunately we have it. What I've summed up for them on the pro side is that prohibition has not worked. Consumption hasn't stopped. Chief Jensen has been in law enforcement for years and years, and people are still smoking marijuana. People have marijuana all over the place. So it's not working. So their position is it's not working, we need to legalize it. The crime rate has gone up. And with that, individuals are jailed for marijuana. Individuals go to prison for marijuana. The jails are full, etc. Wasting too much time and money, wasting the time of law enforcement and money involved because we're focusing so much on marijuana, we're not focusing on serious crime, we're not focusing upon the opiate epidemic that is so crucial and so vital and so relevant in our society. That money could be used for other sources. The tax revenue aspect. According to their statements, Colorado state tax revenue had grown $500 million since 2014. Million. 500 million. In Nevada alone, in its first year, $70 million. In Nevada alone, $70 million for their first year for tax revenue. Next slide, please. And the one after that. Should be the next click. Okay, you can keep clicking that. Thank you, Ruth. According to what they had stated, over 200,000 people in Michigan use medical marijuana. It cuts down on the synthetic substitutes that are out there, the K2, the spice, etc. The prohibition has created a new market, which we knew very well here in Huron County with the K2 and spice epidemic, that was eventually curtailed through legislation by our government, state government, and that was a result of the prohibition. The other, and this is what they'd stated, far less toxic than prescription drugs, which is debatable, certainly, and we're going to discuss that. It's a safe drug. You heard one of the individuals say, a doctor say it's the same addiction level as caffeine. This is what their side is. And it's a substitute for opiate medication. There is a 64% decrease in opiate use regarding pain management for the doctor that is from the University of Michigan. Finally, marijuana is more of an exit drug than a gateway drug. That is, in sum and substance, what the pros are. And that is the side of the individuals here at this particular forum. Are there any comments regarding these at all? Any suggestions, any statements, anything? Mr. Alfman.
Who made that list up?
That list I put together from what they stated. That's what they stated. I didn't make it up. I just took it right from them, from their mouths.
I'm not accusing you.
Oh no, I know that.
I've done some checking on their facts and figures. I got a hold of the lady in Colorado that's in charge of the health department, where she is in charge of the purity of the marijuana and stuff. She won't even live in Denver anymore. She says it's a mess. Their tax revenue is far less than what is stated. Bay City Times, in the last 3 weeks, 53 million the first week, 125 million the second week, and this week's was 258 million. Colorado says they end up with about 10%. None of it's going to their schools. Their teachers are demanding raises, and they have no money for them.
On the con side of this, in a few moments, you're going to hear an individual who resides in Colorado. And he's going to describe to you what he has experienced. And I believe his wife is a medical doctor. I could be wrong, Ruth. I'm not sure if that's correct, but you'll hear him speak on that issue. But this is what is the pro side. relative to this proposal, and that's what is out there, and you know, in fairness to both sides, I guess I'm acting as a moderator. What I'm doing is just giving you what the pro side is, what they're touting, and you're going to hear the con side in just a moment. And it's rather when you hear the con side, it's just like black and white. It's where did you get those figures from? How did you put these things together? But again, that's for all of you to decide when it comes time in November. Tom.
Judge, I've heard the prohibition doesn't work argument for as long as I can remember. And if you want to use that argument, if prohibition doesn't work, then why not legalize everything? Why not legalize heroin, methamphetamine, everything?
Well, one of the comments they made that I didn't add, and I should have probably added in fairness to them, was it's your body, you can do with it as you wish. But the prohibition aspect, I agree. I mean, I remember for years and years that argument has always been the chief argument relative to it.
Absolutely, it's always the one that we law.
Now, and you would be surprised on the con side, it's not necessarily the con side, and you'll make your own minds up. The con side is not necessarily that, absolutely not, this is horrible, marijuana is dangerous, death, etc. No, they even talk about maybe, as opposed to legalizing it, decriminalizing it.
They get a health program.
And you'll be able to hear that in just a moment. And you will also hear, basically, it's kind of a little early to, you know, all these studies, they're going to question each and every study that was presented in the pro argument. So you're going to hear that. And if there are no other comments, Ruth, if you don't mind, we'll go to the con side.
Wait,
Can we- one more?
Yes, please, please. I'm sorry. That's the best we could do with the audio. Yes.
I know I came a little late, I got here as soon as I could. Who are the people that are, I mean, besides they just said who they were, but I see the thing in front of their table. Who is this group? It's just...
These are 3 individuals that were asked to appear to argue the pro side, and 3 on the con side.
So they were invited to a fan meeting type deal?
Yes.
Down in Detroit or something?
Similar to this, it was in Metro Detroit, and it was basically what we're doing here, except we're not getting the pro and con argument from live individuals, we're just hearing what they're saying and presenting it to you to make up your own mind. So I invite anyone to move closer, please do. And then we'll proceed accordingly. The time on that will be on the right side. It should say 113. Oh, you're right there. Right there. 113:58. So I'd stay right there.
I'm going even closer.
I mentioned there, I should have PTSD.
Yeah.
PTSD with military veterans. The individual that spoke, the bald gentleman, he was talking about, he was in active service. I believe he stated he broke his back. And that you'll
He's
hear
not
later.
active now, but he had 27 years.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And he's dealing with a number of veterans that are coming to see him. He will admit later, and you may not see it because we may not be able to show that portion of it, he's also a user of marijuana as well. So, Ruth, if you want to go ahead, please.
200,000 patients, I see around 2,000 patients in a clinic per year or so. And this is the one thing that if you ask certain people, it's a good question, it's difficult to answer. So there are different conditions, but I see a lot of patients that I ask them, you know, why you use cannabis? A lot of times they use it for themselves.
Impactful stories. And, you know, stories are really impactful in how we formulate our decisions. And the folks that it impacts.
This is the gentleman from Colorado.
Really matters. And so for me, legalization impacted me and my family. And I want to share that story with you as well. So, you know, my wife and I, we live in Northeast Denver. And when we would go for walks in our neighborhood, and we would live in a, you know, a very nice like neighborhood of Denver with lots of families our age, young kids. Every time we went out for a walk, you know, post-legalization, with my daughter in her stroller, a cloud of marijuana would cover my daughter in her stroller. And there was one evening we were just walking, and I wasn't working for Sam, I was working in healthcare. My wife turned to me and she said, you know what, I can't believe this is normal. I can't believe any family has to deal with secondhand smoke and covering their kids in their strollers while they're out for a walk in the neighborhood. And that was something that really struck home for me. And it wasn't long after that I went to work for SAM because I wanted to share my story and stories of so many others who have lived legalization firsthand to see what happened. Now let's be real. In Colorado, we learned what legalization was all about. Legalization is about one thing and one thing only. It's about profits. It's about a massive industry. And so let me tell you something. When we voted for legalization of marijuana in Colorado, we thought we were just voting to get people out of prison. And we thought that this was just about kind of, you know what, people shouldn't go to jail for smoking a joint. By the way, I agree. You know, people thought that this was about that. Unfortunately, what we got was something totally not about that. What we got was a massive commercialized industry that now is making billions of dollars. And what they've done is they've started selling limitless potency THC products, up to 99% potency THC products. These sorts of products, there's no research onto the damage that they do on the human mind because they've only been around since we legalized in Colorado. The research that we have is from the Woodstock days. And in the Woodstock days, the potency was 3 to 5%. Now we're talking about 99% THC. Now here's the thing. You could be out there and you may say, you know what, Luke, like, I don't really care what your experience is. I think, you know, legalization is no big deal. Well, let me tell you something, okay? If you're on that point, thinking about it that way, I don't know what is going on.
I get the other.
Thank you. Then, you know, let me tell you this, okay? What does it hurt to wait until we get the solid research on what high potency, 99% THC potency does to the human brain? Because we don't know. Now let me tell you this, okay? So this industry has started selling these products. They're using kid-friendly advertisements. I can tell you from first-hand experience, I was just in Denver a few weeks ago. Cookie Monster is being used to sell high-potency THC products. So there are kid-friendly ads being used. They're coming in the form of lollipops, candies, brownies, cookies, things that for me as a dad, but honestly, me as a responsible citizen, I don't want that for anybody in the community. I don't want more kids being sold to. But here's the thing, okay, I started 2 companies, as I said in my bio. I would never want to limit myself as a business owner. I want as many people to use my product as possible. That's a for-profit business. That's how it works by definition. For the pot industry, it's no different. They're selling a product. Their product is an addictive drug. That drug needs to be sold to as many people as possible. And guess what? There are now Silicon Valley and Wall Street investors who are the ones that are bankrolling this. So look, you know, the folks over here have shared some very meaningful testimonies about the impacts. And you know what? I don't deny those anecdotes. And I also don't deny the fact that perhaps marijuana has medical uses. And I think by far we should research it. I think that if there are medicinal uses of the components, let's have them. But you know what? That's another conversation. That's medical marijuana. If there are problems with medical marijuana law, let's fix it. If we don't want people going to jail for smoking a joint in Michigan, let's decriminalize it. We don't have to legalize it. But we don't have to have this false dichotomy. In Colorado, we were sold the false dichotomy. We were sold either you legalize it or people keep going to prison. But what we didn't know at the time, and now thank God I've learned that, and I've learned better policy options, we could do decriminalization. We could just say that, you know what, people are not going to go to jail for having a joint. And then, you know what, folks don't go to jail for smoking marijuana. Problem solved. Now, look, here's the thing, okay? We were sold that bill of goods, but what we got was an industry. What we got was Wall Street and Silicon Valley that wanted to make money off our kids. What we got were kid-friendly advertisements and 99% THC products. Okay, very, very scary. And what were the results? Well, the data is preliminary. So don't let anybody at this table here tell you we have the final answer. We don't have the final answer. We've had legalization for 5 years, and yet everyone here is trying to rush us into legalization. We haven't even seen what the final story is out of these states. In Colorado, I'll tell you though, the preliminary data is very concerning. In Colorado, we've seen a 156% increase in drug driving fatalities as a direct result of marijuana. In Colorado, we have seen youth use rise. In fact, across the country, for kids 12 and up, there are 6,800 new marijuana initiates every day since legalization. It is up significantly over the last decade. Okay? In Colorado, what we saw was the tax revenue promises. It was a drop in the bucket. We ended up with a fraction of a % of our state budget is made up for by pot taxes. Oh, and guess what? The teachers are on strike and have been. Earlier this year, teachers all across Pueblo, a southern town in Colorado, were on strike because there's no pay. So you know what? The money was not what was promised, okay? And here's the other thing. I'm going to go back to my business hat for a second here. Okay? If you're a business owner, if I'm a business owner, I told you, invest in my company, I'm making $100 million a year. Oh, that sounds great, but what's the next question you're going to ask? What are the costs of running your business? Let's not talk about revenue without talking about costs, okay? It costs a ton of money to regulate marijuana. It costs a ton of money to handle the property damage, to handle the vehicle damage, the broken lives. How many, here's my question, okay? If we say, oh, only a few families, or only a few people extra die from drug driving deaths. Only a few people. Only a few extra families bereft of their loved ones? Is that really what we want when we can have much smarter policy options, such as decriminalization and focusing on science-based medical marijuana research? I mean, there are so many other options here. Why do we have to legalize? That's just the question that I put to you today, and I ask you to consider it, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. And here's the thing, okay? Full respect for those of you who may disagree with me, but I think we can all agree that the research is still out. We have so much left to learn. Why not leave it to the states like mine, unfortunately, that chose to be the test beds, that chose to make our people the test tubes, right? And unfortunately, my state has to suffer for that, but at least it can be so that great people in Michigan can learn. Now look, I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I was born there. I was raised in Colorado. Great family, friends. I spent so much of my life in Michigan. I love this state. I don't want us to make the same state that my state of Colorado made. And I'm here today equipped with first-hand experience as a dad, as a millennial, as somebody who worked in healthcare, the largest healthcare employer in the state. I worked with over 1,000 physicians. I've met the first 3 physicians and 2 physicians today that I found that thought marijuana was a good idea, to legalize wholesale. So, you know what? There's a lot of different points here. You're going to hear different facts back and forth. And when you hear those different facts, and you hear our facts, you hear theirs, and you think, which one's real? That's a great question to ask. Maybe if we're asking which facts are real, we probably shouldn't be moving to wholesale legalize something across our state that we don't even fully understand yet. So I ask you to consider all these things and vote no. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luke.
All right, Doctor. I'm claustrophobic and he smells like shawarma. So, I want to steal something, and flattery is the ultimate form of honor. I, like you, do not consider myself anti-cannabis. I worked for Hospice of Michigan on Mack Avenue for 7 years. I gave 100% of my patients in palliative care and hospice full access to medical marijuana. And I showed them how to grind up the damn stuff and put it in coconut oil and backfill capsules. Because nobody should have to ever worry about end of life. And that is where our law took its roots. Like this young man here who looks 12 years old, I think we really do need to fix our medical marijuana law. But I'm going to give you my arguments for where we stand. I consider myself an honest cannabis educator. Next slide, please. And it's true. Nobody is overdosing on cannabis, or at least not the mother's own cannabis. I've been on CNN for 14 years. I've been seen by 400 million people for naloxone advocacy, and it's true that fentanyl and heroin are our demons today. But we have to look at where we're going. Next slide, please. Legalizing medical marijuana was difficult for me to accept, but I chose to move slower and to listen. And I learned from my patients, and I never really trust anybody that writes laws, nothing personal. But I've looked at some of the data, and decriminalization and recreational legalization have left us with an increase in fatal car crash data. Next slide, please. These numbers are small, but these are crash modification factors that shows when we went from prohibition to decriminalization and full legalization. If you notice, and you can't because it's too damn small, Arizona, New Jersey, our ratios are below 1. That's medical cannabis. That's safe because we have gatekeepers. And I don't believe the gatekeepers, I'm not supposed to beat up on the state of Michigan or anything, but they're so overworked and they're so overstressed. I don't know where we're going to get tighter regulations if we go to legalization. Did they do the right thing with pain medicine? Come on, this is terrible. We have things that are out of control. Let's fix what we have, and let's take the opportunity to enforce the right laws and not be rushed into anything. Next slide, please. So our data shows us, based on ratios, that there is an association between changing marijuana laws and fatal car crashes. That is where your cannabis deaths are. They're not in overdoses. They're in impaired driving. Next slide, please. That data was taken from the Journal of Transportation and Health. It's an investigation association between marijuana law change and marijuana-involved fatal crashes. Next slide, please. And one of my friends, and I do have friends across the aisle, some of them I don't get to see as often as I like. Dr. Cicely, do you know Carl Hart from Columbia? Okay. Carl Hart was one of my teachers. Carl Hart has the best dreads in America.
Yeah.
Okay? And in my addiction session in 2008 in a Chicago hotel room, Carl taught me to avoid cannabis in certain high-risk groups: cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, schizophrenia, and anybody who's already addicted or dependent on another substance. There is no stronger advocate for cannabis than Carl. But you know why I love Carl? It's not that we're on opposite sides. One of his missions is to figure out how to treat cannabis dependence and cravings when people want to stop. As an addiction doctor, I don't have medication-assisted treatment like methadone or Suboxone or Vivitrol or Antabuse for the other substances, because we need more time for research. Next slide, please. And cannabis has been valuable. The research that I've done has shown me that the 10 milligram cannabis usually runs about a Tylenol 3, and you can ramp it up with the potency. Next. So what we see from Amy Bonnard's studies at the VA, University of Michigan, is that, next, when we combine opioids and cannabis, smoking marijuana, not medical marijuana, but smoking marijuana in a recreational sense, and being on greater than 100 milligrams of opiates per day, leads to a higher risk of overdose death. And Amy Bonnard is not a cannabis phobe. She's just trying to look at how do we make vets' lives easier and safer. Next slide, please. Go back one quick, because that's important. You hear this, that it's safer than alcohol. And I would beg to differ that, for me, what I believe to be true is that's wrong. It's different than alcohol. They're both impaired agents. What we see, next slide, is in a study done at Columbia University, when we compared cannabis, alcohol, and cannabis plus alcohol, we had detrimental effects in different higher cognitive and automatic functions. And what I would say is alcohol totally breaks down complex control driving, but you kind of have some automatic skills to take over. And cannabis is the opposite. It breaks down the automatic, and it leaves some more complex positions in place. Next slide, please. And we say here in this bold billboard, because we are saying, well, maybe it'll reduce opioid deaths. Next slide, please. In this state, our state data, we've had a law that's made medical marijuana available, and we've gone from 225 opioid deaths to over 1,800 last year, and we've had cannabis for almost 10 years. And the prescribing, this is overdose deaths. Everybody knows that we've only had increase in prescriptions since 2008 when the law first hit. Next slide, please. From the Colorado Department of Public Health, a date before cannabis went recreational and a date after, we see there is at least a double in hospitalizations. Next slide, please. And this is Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. With medical marijuana, we still have 13% people submitting for treatment.
So Dr. Bloom,
Please.
it's Scott's time, or you think okay.
I'm turning it over to you. Sorry about that shawarma thing, buddy.
I don't know which side I'm on.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. I mean, obviously, this is a big issue. There's a great turnout here today. Usually when we're out doing community forums, it's tough to get people to a community forum. And to see the turnout here is great. What I'd like to share is just, first of all, I am someone in long-term recovery. I'm someone that works in treatment. I'm also a father of 2 teenage girls, and someone who was recently diagnosed with cancer and has kind of looked at medical benefits. Unfortunately, we're here talking about recreational marijuana, okay? We're here talking about the commercialization, not the legalization, the commercialization of marijuana. We're living in a 30-year lie right now, right? We have the worst epidemic.
Treatment court professionals that available evidence does not support the legalization of marijuana. They oppose Proposal 1, and this information, and again, this I'm going to give you the next slide, the actual HTTP, the web address that spells this all out for you. And then I'll allow, actually Ruth, if you wouldn't mind to go to that next slide. And there it is right there. So Ben and Miss, if you want to take a picture of that so you at least see where the official position is, that's the web page to go to. The final thought on it from our perspective right now, it's too early. The concerns are much more advanced than the legalization at this point. It doesn't mean that we're fully opposed to it, but at this point, it's just too early in the game, and there are a lot of concerns we have, especially youth. Any other comments, any other suggestions? Mrs. Jensen, just, you deal with individuals charged with marijuana every day.
It's probably the most common drug that I see when we drug test.
For misdemeanants, for instance, misdemeanants who have a simple possession of marijuana, if they're not placed on 7411, which is a drug deferral statute, or Holmes Youthful Trainee status, what is the average jail stay for individuals charged with possession?
For possession? Unless they're coming in on a probation violation late, or you're not getting it usually for an original possession.
They're not getting jail time. They'll get probation, community service, fines. There's a driver's license sanction imposed with it if you're not on a deferral program.
And a lot of that would depend on their prior record too.
Absolutely, but I should have said this a little clearer. First-time offenders, for instance, we're not seeing individuals, and it's no mystery in the circuit court as well. If you're up in circuit court and you have individuals charged with the double possession of marijuana charge, which can turn it into a 2-year offense. The gentleman from the treatment facility, the third gentleman that spoke, only 2 people involved with possession are in prison in the Michigan Department of Corrections. 150 individuals or so are with intent to deliver or actual delivery of marijuana. So the prison population is vastly lower than, for instance, alcohol and violent crimes. So the question is, are we enforcing the violent crimes? Are we still allocating the resources to law enforcement? That's a question I guess each of you have to decide when you make your decision in November. But at least FAN's position is what it is, and that's how we stand on it. And we hope that when you leave tonight, that you share this information with your family and friends. Let them know, and they can make an informed decision as well. At any point in time, you can look us up on our FAN Facebook page. Just look up Huron Tuscola County FAN, or if you look up Families Against Narcotics, you can actually see this video on Facebook as well. Any other comments or questions before we go? Hearing none, I want to thank everyone for your attendance and your involvement in this. I want to thank the media outlets as well for being here. It's greatly appreciated. And have a wonderful evening.